In the early hours of August 14, 1958, Elvis comes home, tries to sleep a few hours, and wakes up to the worst news of his life. Gladys Love Presley, his mother, has died at 46. The world watches the king break in public, and from that moment on, nothing would be the same. But what really happened that week, and why did this loss become a wound that shaped the man behind the myth? On Friday, August 8, 1958, Gladys Love Presley returns to Memphis feeling weak and feverish. She is admitted to Methodist Hospital with a diagnosis of acute hepatitis. Meanwhile, Elvis is in training at Fort Hood, Texas. When the severity of her condition reaches the Army, emergency leave is granted quickly. Not a celebrity privilege, but a military procedure used in critical family situations. Early the following week, Private Presley boards a trip to Memphis. On the afternoon of August 12, Elvis passes through the gates of Graceland in silence and heads straight to the hospital. He finds his mother worn down but conscious. The visits are short, interspersed with medical protocols and the family taking turns. His father, Vernon, tries to manage the flow of people and phone calls. The house at Graceland is already receiving messages from fans, neighbors, and church friends. Despite the noise outside, the atmosphere in the hospital room is hushed speech and anxious waiting. There's hope for a turnaround, that sudden improvement you sometimes hear about in hospital stories, but the staff doesn't hide their concern. On Wednesday, August 13, the hours feel elastic. Elvis returns to the hospital in the morning, goes back to Graceland to rest, and visits his mother again at the end of the day. For him, it's a repeated choreography, walking the white corridors, holding Gladys's hand, listening to medical explanations in terms that feel too technical for a heavy heart. Outside, the local press is probing, but there's no solid narrative yet, just the rumor that the star's mother is very ill. Inside the room, vital signs fluctuate. The fever drops and then returns. It's the clinical portrait of a body weakened after days battling hepatic inflammation. In the early hours of August 14, the news arrives like a clean cut. Gladys Presley dies at 46. The term that becomes standard in the records is heart failure, and it's worth a brief public clarification. Heart failure is not the same as an instantaneous cardiac arrest. It is the heart's inability to pump blood adequately, often a consequence of systemic stress or another serious condition. In Gladys's case, the acute hepatitis in the days prior helps compose the clinical picture that led to the outcome. For Elvis, the pre-dawn hours are a free-fall. In the hours that follow, he alternates between silence and tears, long embraces with his father, and brief trips to the empty bedroom at home. The family begins the practical rites, contacting the funeral home, notifying relatives, containing public curiosity. Still on the 14th, movement at Graceland grows. The phone won't stop. Neighbors and friends offer to bring food, drive people, handle paperwork. The inner circle tries to protect what's essential, giving Elvis a few minutes of privacy before the pain has to be shared with the world. In that interval, small domestic details take on symbolic weight. There are accounts that Elvis asked for his mother's room not to be altered, a common gesture in sudden grief when organizing the physical space serves as a last attempt to keep intact what has been lost. Amid clipboards, messages, and comings and goings, the 14th advances in a continuous flow of decisions. Some are logistical, preparing the wake, choosing the hymns his mother loved. Others are silent, kept only between father and son. The last 72 hours leave a clear trail for the script. Friday, 8/8, hospitalization for hepatitis. Tuesday, 8/12, Elvis arrives on emergency leave and splits his time between the hospital and Graceland. Wednesday, 8/13, a tense vigil with irregular clinical signs. The pre-dawn of Thursday, 8/14, the outcome due to heart failure. It's also the period in which a mistaken myth takes hold that you can correct in the video. Elvis was not in Germany when his mother died. He was still serving in Texas and would only ship to Europe weeks later. A few curiosities enrich the narrative without sensationalism. The emergency leave granted to Elvis follows the military protocol of compassionate leave, common in cases of severe illness in an immediate family member. There was no special treatment written on paper. even if the chain of command knew who the soldier was. Another. The Presleys' Southern evangelical faith, so present in Elvis's childhood, reappears in those days as comfort and music, explaining why the hymns chosen for the farewell speak directly to the memory of Gladys. At the center of it all, however, is the same image: a son who comes back from the base to watch over his mother in the hospital, clings to every sign of improvement, and discovers before dawn that life has shifted on its axis. At the end of those 72 hours, Elvis is not just the rising artist and exemplary soldier, he is a man marked by the foundational loss of his adult biography. And it is from that emptiness, opened between the afternoon of the 12th and the early hours of the 14th, that the rest of the story will unfold. Before Elvis was the king, he was the boy from Tupelo who was born a twin and survived. His brother Jesse Garon came into the world stillborn, and that absence followed Elvis like an inaugural silence. At 23, Gladys Love receives the baby who remained and decides, with the strength of those who have known lack, that she will do everything to protect him. From there, a visceral bond forms. Mother and son walk together through overdue bills, modest homes, and faith as a compass. Poverty isn't an anecdote, it's the setting. In 1948, the family moves to Memphis in search of work. They live in simple housing projects where Gladys sews, improvises, stretches food, and repeats to her son that dignity doesn't depend on your wallet but on your character. Gladys's religiosity, church, hymns, gospel quartets, wasn't a household ornament. It shaped rhythm, vocabulary, and comfort. Elvis grows up hearing voices harmonize in registers that he would later carry into the studio with an almost devotional conviction. It's no coincidence that his most prestigious awards come from gospel. It's a return to the sonic cradle of his childhood. When the whole country would see him swivel his hips, what only he knew was that beneath the flash of rock and roll pulsed the cadence of Sunday service. That moral axis, which Gladys planted early, explains why Elvis could be exuberant on stage and still remain shy, gentle, and homebound in many private conversations. Gladys was 4 years older than Vernon. They married young and faced serious hardships, including the husband's brief incarceration in the 1930s. While Vernon was away, mother and son drew even closer. From that period comes the intimacy that would later astonish journalists. They called each other by nicknames, traded confidences, shared affectionate codes. She called him Satinin. He responded with tender humor and absolute loyalty. When Elvis started making money, his first grand gesture wasn't a star's whim. It was a gift for his mother, the famous pink Cadillac. Quiet irony of fate, Gladys didn't drive. Even so, the car became a symbol of sonship turned into gratitude. Success, however, charges an emotional toll. Gladys doesn't like the exposure, fears the crowds, fears the pace of the road, and, above all, fears losing her boy to a world the family doesn't know. She watches the papers with suspicion and tries to keep Elvis grounded. Finish school, treat elders with respect, don't let it go to your head. Fame brings money, but also distance. In 1956 and 1957, as the country surrenders to him, the home suffers a new kind of noise. An insistent doorbell, a phone that won't stop, a schedule that dismantles any routine. Gladys experiences a cruel paradox: the joy of seeing her son recognized and the anguish of feeling him ever farther away, even while in the same house. When Elvis buys Graceland in 1957, the public reads the gesture as extravagance. For him, it's the installation of a harbor. His parents move in with their son, as always. The mansion, which seems to overflow the map of the American dream, is Elvis's way of saying, "I still need you." The living room, the hymns, favorite meals, small laughter, everything there tries to simulate the protection of that modest Memphis kitchen. For the outside world, the star. For the inside, the boy who asks for a blessing, who rests his head on his mother's shoulder in the hallway, who seeks from Gladys the approval no audience can give. In 1958, the Army calls. Gladys suffers at the thought of seeing her son in another state, under different rules, and, to narrow the gap, she and Vernon temporarily move near Fort Hood. It's a biographical detail that says a lot. The family goes after their uniformed son, not to keep tabs, but to be available when the silence of the barracks grows heavy. Gladys's motherhood isn't possessive in any theatrical sense. It's watchful, everyday, almost humble. She fears scandals, bad influences, and the hours when Elvis won't be under her roof. And Elvis reciprocates with phone calls, letters, and visits whenever he can, as if he knows his public courage needs private shelter. Gladys's death, that August of 1958, doesn't cut only an emotional tie. It dismantles an entire support system. To those looking in from the outside, what would crack soon after is the invincible myth. For Elvis, what collapses is the most intimate reference point, the person he sang to first, the one he told his fears to, the one to whom he owed, without anyone charging him, the best of himself. Mourning, then, isn't just sadness, it's disorientation. Over time, friends will notice a new shadow, a fatigue that hadn't been there before. It's not that Elvis dims, it's that the light now reflects off an inner wall with a different texture. That bond explains traits of the adult man that Biography sometimes simplifies. The almost impulsive generosity, the love of gifting, the need to keep the inner circle close, the difficulty tolerating certain kinds of loneliness. All of it speaks to a formation with Gladys as the gravitational center. It also explains his relationship with spiritual music in his mature phase. When the showbiz machine demanded exuberance, Elvis turned to hymns as if refueling his emotional tank at a station only he and his mother knew. Singing How Great Thou Art or He Touched Me wasn't just repertoire. It was a conversation with Gladys's memory. There's another seldom explored dimension, the surviving son, trying to make sense of his own fate. The absent twin hovers like an unanswered question. The present, intense, loving mother fills that gap with purpose. Becoming Elvis Presley was, in part, a response to that invisible calling. To be worthy of the mother who fought so hard, to rise to the height of a love that set him on his feet when there was so little. That's why, when Gladys's heart fails, something in Elvis's inner compass loses true north. The myth continues, the artist delivers, the soldier fulfills his duty, but the man carries an absence applause can't resolve. In the end, Mother and Son isn't just a touching biographical note. It's the key to reading choices, fears, and refuges. The boy who survived his brother and grew up hand in hand with his mother turns vulnerability into aesthetic power. The public sees charisma. Gladys would see responsibility. The world applauds the phenomenon. She looked after the son. And it's precisely in that tension, between the stage and the kitchen, between Graceland and the church pew, between the noise and the prayer, that the Elvis the planet came to know was born. Without Gladys, the story would still be big. With her, it gained a soul. August 14, 1958, ends without the woman who was the moral center of the Presley family. What comes after isn't only private grief. It's the reorganization of an entire public biography. Elvis goes through the funeral rites, steadies his father, tries to thank the hundreds who come to Graceland, and still has to return to the army. Within days, he reports back to his command, ends his emergency leave, and resumes the martial routine. No microphones, no stage, no makeup. The barracks remain, the least poetic place to learn to live with absence. The weeks that follow create a contradiction that will accompany him for years. The world demands the star, he just wants the sun. The uniform offers discipline, but not consolation. Close friends notice a new quietness, a restraint that wasn't typical. The phone line between Graceland and the barracks becomes a lifeline. Vernon tries to handle documents, the house, the emptiness in the hallways. There are accounts that Gladys's bedroom remained untouched for a time, as so many families do when death comes too soon. It's not fetish, it's the human attempt to slow a clock that won't stop. From there, rumors grow. Some say Elvis was in Germany when it all happened. He wasn't. Others reduce his mother's cause of death to a single factor. Medicine is rarely that simple. Gossip culture demands quick verdicts. Real life answers with nuance. Gladys's clinical picture involves the hepatitis that weakened her the week before and the cardiac outcome in the early morning. It's understandable that, without public medical documents and with the pain of the country's biggest singer on display, competing versions would multiply. What matters, however, isn't winning a debate, it's understanding how this loss reshapes Elvis from within. Back on duty, he follows orders and later heads to Germany. There, he meets people who will become part of his inner circle and begins to fill the silence with new routines. But certain artistic choices in the following years reveal the web of grief. Gospel, which had always been part of his life, rises to the stature of safe harbor. Recording hymns isn't a marketing move, it's a way to speak with his mother's memory in a language they shared before fame. Devotional songs reappear in the studio as if they were open letters to Gladys, an emotional refueling when the world asked for hits and movies. Another clue lies in how Elvis begins to care for and sometimes overprotect his circle. Gifting becomes an almost liturgical ritual, as if spreading generosity were lighting small candles down a dark hallway. Keeping friends close, paying bills, building a kind of mobile family, all of this speaks to an old fear of losing what he loves. The public sees extravagance. Those who know the story see ties being affirmed so they won't break again. In parallel, his relationship with his father has to be relaunched. Vernon loses his wife and gains a son who is quieter, more adult, more protective of his emotional redoubt. In the realm of rumors, two others gain traction and cross decades. The first tries to explain every choice Elvis made in the 60s and 70s as a direct consequence of grief. That's reductionism. Gladys's loss is central, but not the only force. There's the industrial pressure of Hollywood, the exhausting schedule, the whirlwind of expectations from an entire country. The second rumor assigns to his mother's death a kind of prophecy about Elvis's own end, as if it were written that he too would fade early. It's a melodramatic and unfair reading. What history shows, more soberly, is an artist trying to operate inside a giant machine while seeking, amid tours and recordings, the same comfort he found in the living room of his childhood. The public memory of Gladys crystallizes in small rites. Fans leave flowers in the Graceland garden, especially in August. Mentions in interviews appear discreetly, without spectacle. Some songs people start to hear differently, as if each note carried a conversation that can no longer take place. In certain stage recordings, when Elvis performs spiritual repertoire, there's a gravity in the interpretation that doesn't depend on the band's volume. For a few minutes, it feels as if the entire audience becomes a church pew, and his voice finds the same boyhood timbre from Tupelo, with his mother singing softly beside him. The physical legacy of this story also changes places. Gladys was first buried at Forest Hill Cemetery in Memphis. Years later, with Elvis's death and the turmoil around the cemetery, the family decides it's best to bring mother and son home, to the meditation garden at Graceland. The transfer turns the garden into a space of popular pilgrimage. Tourists, rock devotees, the curious, and neighbors form an unbroken procession of memories. Visitors understand that the narrative takes on a human scale there. It's not just the icon's resting place, it's the rest of an ordinary family who lived extraordinary things. There's still the invisible inheritance, the way Gladys's absence teaches Elvis to value pauses and returns. Amid the spectacle of everything, he preserves moments of reserve. Those around him learn there are doors that open and doors that don't. That's not a star's caprice, it's a preservation mechanism. No wonder that when he chooses to regain artistic control at crucial moments, like the late 60s television special, there's a sense of restart that has less to do with career and more to do with recovering an inner voice. In the end, rumors lose strength before memory. Elvis's mother is neither a supporting character nor a porcelain angel. She is the figure who, through her presence and her loss, structures a before and an after. The legacy that remains is twofold. For the artist, the memory of Gladys serves as a moral reference and emotional compass, something he turns to when stage lights stop answering the hardest questions. For the public, she helps decode the enigma of charisma, Behind the myth stood a man who loved his mother deeply and, without her, had to learn to breathe at a different rhythm. After the farewell doesn't close the story, it opens a chapter. Elvis will go on doing what he was born to do: sing, film, and chant, but now with a shadow that sometimes became shelter. Between rumor and remembrance, what endures is a legacy woven from songs, quiet gestures, and a house in Memphis where pain turned into a place of visitation and respect. There, in the garden that brings mother and son together, the narrative finds rest. Not a resolution, but a possible peace. If this story touched you and helped you see the man behind the myth, help this video reach more people. Like it now, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notifications to receive the next chapters. That greatly strengthens our work and tells YouTube this content is worth it. Share it with those who love Elvis, family, friends, groups, and tell us in the comments, which moment from the lives of Gladys and Elvis moved you the most? Thank you for staying with us. Take care, and we'll see you in the next video.